Homeless mom with kids inherited. $900 Cold War bunker. Her German Shepherd found 290 Sometimes a story doesn't begin with a miracle. Sometimes it begins with a mother who has nothing left to lose, and a German Shepherd who refuses to let her die with her secrets. People think the unbelievable part is the money. It's not. The unbelievable part is how one dog sensed a truth buried for 60 years and pulled a homeless family into a fight against the very government that once trusted their bloodline. By the time Lena realized what Ruger had uncovered, it was already too late. Agents were closing in. Her children were running for safety, and a secret older than all of them was about to explode into the world. All because one dog chose not to stay silent. The morning the cold finally bit through the metal skin of the minivan, Lena Carter knew she was out of time. Frost crawled across the inside of the windshield, thin as breath on glass. Her 3 kids were still sleeping in the back, bundled under thrift store blankets. Ruger, her German Shepherd, lay pressed against her seat, wide awake, ears forward, guarding the only world they had left. They'd been homeless for 8 months. 8 months of parking lots, gas stations, nights spent reminding the kids that adventure sounded better than survival. Lena tried to believe it too, but hunger had a way of stripping beliefs down to bone. That morning, something in her snapped. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the sound of Emma's tiny cough. Maybe it was just the moment when exhaustion finally outweighed fear. She reached for her phone, praying the food bank in Missoula still had something left. But instead of a message from the food bank, she saw an unread email. The subject line was so absurd she almost deleted it. Estate transfer notification. She opened it anyway, more curious than hopeful. Dear Ms. Carter, you are listed as the last living relative of Mr. Howard Lane. Per his will, you have inherited 60 acres of land outside Colby Ridge, Montana. Parcel includes a cabin structure and a decommissioned Cold War fallout shelter. Appraised value, $900. Please respond within 30 days to claim. Lena stared at the screen. She didn't know a Howard Lane. She didn't have relatives. She barely had a future. Yet the message sat there, impossible and real. Ruger shifted, placing his paw gently on her knee. It wasn't a normal nudge. It was steady, grounding, like he sensed something turning in her. You think it's a scam? She whispered. Ruger held her gaze, eyes alert, focused. If he'd been human, she would have sworn he was telling her no. 3 hours later, the minivan groaned onto a road so remote it barely existed on the map. Pines swallowed the sky. Snow buried the earth. Her kids woke as the tires crunched to a stop in front of a leaning cabin that didn't look worth even $900. But behind it stood something else. A steel hatch, half buried in the ground, washed in rust and winter light. The bunker! Lena breathed. Ruger was out of the van before she finished speaking. His tail was stiff, not wagging. He circled the hatch once, twice, nose low to the metal. Then he froze. Every muscle locked. His ears cut toward the ground like he heard something she didn't. Lena swallowed hard. Easy, boy. She pulled the hatch. It groaned open, exhaling stale air years old. A ladder dropped into darkness. Her kids huddled behind her, silent, waiting. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like a door into possibility. She clicked on her flashlight. Dust swirled in the beam, drifting through a long concrete room. Old rations, obsolete radios, blankets crumbling at the edges. It was cold, dead, forgotten. But it was shelter. It's ours, Lena whispered. For the first time in months, the kids smiled. Tyler ran his hand over a metal storage locker. Emma bounced on her toes, amazed the room didn't have wheels. Even little Ava whispered a breathless wow. Lena almost allowed herself to exhale, but Ruger wouldn't follow them in. He stood at the top of the ladder, hackles raised, staring into the bunker like something down there bothered him. "Ruger, come on," she urged. He didn't move. Then he did something she'd never seen him do. He padded down the ladder one rung at a time, cautious, deliberate, nose working in quick bursts. When he reached the floor, he didn't explore like the kids. He went straight to the far wall and pressed his head against it. Lena frowned. "You're acting strange, buddy." He didn't look back. He stayed locked in place, ears pinned toward the wall, breath tight. A soft rumble vibrated in his chest. Not aggression. Warning. And that was the moment Lena understood the difference between fear and instinct. Her fear had followed her for months. Ruger's instinct had never once been wrong. The kids ran around discovering canned goods stamped 1964. Lena forced a smile and kept moving, but her eyes stayed on Ruger. Something was behind that wall. Something he could sense and she couldn't. When she stepped closer, Ruger turned his head sharply, giving her a low, urgent bark. It wasn't a playful bark. It wasn't a scared bark. It was a, "You need to listen to me" bark. She froze. The kids didn't notice the shift in the air, but Lena did. It was subtle, like the bunker itself had inhaled. She knelt beside Ruger, resting her palm on his back. His heart was steady, not panicked. Whatever he sensed, he wasn't afraid of it. But he respected it. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Ruger touched his nose to the concrete wall. Twice. The same way he alerted when he found something buried at the shelter back in Missoula. Except this time, it wasn't a lost toy or old bone. It was steel, concrete, secrets. Behind the wall, a faint metallic echo traveled through the floor. So soft, Lena almost missed it. The kind of sound nothing makes unless something else is hidden beyond it. She stepped back, pulse hammering. Her inheritance wasn't just a bunker. It was a map to a truth someone had buried so deep it took a dog to find it. And Ruger, standing guard in the dim light, looked at her with a certainty that chilled her more than the Montana winter ever could. Something was in that wall, and it had waited a long time for someone to come back. The bunker smelled like dust and endings. Lena spent the first hour sweeping broken bits of insulation into a pile while her kids explored every corner like they had stepped into a forgotten museum. She tried to keep her movements steady, controlled, like she wasn't terrified this place might collapse around them or swallow them whole. But it was shelter, and shelter beat the minivan. She found a portable generator in a corner buried under tarps. It took 3 tries and a prayer whispered under her breath, but the old machine coughed back to life. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting shaky light through the room. Her kids clapped. That sound alone felt like a blessing. "See?" Lena said, trying to sound strong. "We can make this work for a little while." In truth, she didn't know how long a little while meant. She was used to not knowing. While the kids unpacked blankets from the van, Lena taped cracks in the floor vents and checked the water drums for contamination. She had learned the basics of survival from months of homelessness, lessons no one should ever have to learn. How to keep kids warm without heat. How to stretch food. How to turn courage into routine. Ruger stayed near the supply wall the entire time. He wasn't wandering or relaxing. He was watching. Always that same corner. Always that same thin seam in the concrete. Lena pushed the thought away. She had enough real problems without inventing new ones. She settled the kids with canned soup warmed on a camp stove. For a few minutes the bunker felt almost normal. Steam rose from the bowls. Tyler joked about sleeping in a real cave. Emma kept asking if bears could open metal hatches. Ava pressed her cheek into Ruger's fur, comforted by the warmth. Watching them, Lena remembered the moment it all began to fall apart. She had been a medical receptionist for 5 years, Steady job, decent pay. She wasn't prepared for the hospital merger that erased her position overnight. She wasn't prepared for the landlord who raised rent with 2 weeks' notice. She definitely wasn't prepared for Craig, her ex-husband, to decide fatherhood was optional the minute life got hard. His last message still burned in her memory. Figure it out, Lena. They're your kids. She had figured it out, in the worst way. One motel at a time, one parking lot at a time, one humiliating request for help at a time. And somewhere along the way she found Ruger. He was tied to a dumpster outside a grocery store in Missoula, ribs showing, eyes too tired for a dog that young. The shelter told her he'd been abandoned twice. She wasn't allowed to adopt him because she had no address, but she showed up every day to walk him until one employee finally said quietly, "Take him. He needs you." She had never believed in fate, but Ruger had a way of proving her wrong. He had kept the kids calm through nights of thunder and hunger. He had stood between them and danger more than once. He was steady when she was breaking. Tonight, in the bunker, he was the only one not pretending this place was safe. After dinner, she set up sleeping bags along one wall. The kids fell asleep fast, the kind of exhaustion that comes from too many miles and not enough rest. Lena sat beside them, brushing hair away from Ava's face. Ruger didn't join them. He stood again at the far wall, rigid and focused, like a soldier on duty. "Come here, boy," Lena whispered. He didn't move. Instead, he pressed his nose into the seam of the wall, inhaling deep. Then he stepped back and gave a single, low bark, short, sharp, the kind of alert he used when something wasn't right. Lena felt a chill crawl along her spine. "There's nothing there," she murmured. Ruger didn't believe that. And the truth was, neither did she. When the generator flickered and went out for a moment, the entire bunker sank into a silence so heavy it felt conscious. Lena found herself holding her breath, listening for sounds she couldn't explain. Then came the twist she didn't expect. A small vibration hummed through the concrete beneath her feet. Soft, faint, almost like movement. It lasted only a second, but Ruger snapped to full attention, muscles coiled, ears forward. He wasn't imagining it. Neither was she. This bunker wasn't dead. Something in it was still alive, still powered, still waiting. Lena grabbed Ruger by the collar, grounding herself in the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "I don't know what you hear," she whispered, "but you're not wrong. Something's here." Ruger didn't take his eyes off the wall. He stood guard all night, unmoving, unwavering, the only barrier between her family and a secret sealed behind concrete. Lena lay awake beside her kids, listening to the faint hum that came and went like a heartbeat, trapped behind stone. By dawn, she knew one thing for certain. Whatever this bunker was meant to hide, Ruger had found the first crack in its silence. By the second morning in the bunker, Lena had convinced herself the hum from the wall had been nothing more than pipes settling or old concrete sighing. She needed it to be nothing. She needed at least one piece of her life to be simple. Ruger refused to let her believe that. She was heating oatmeal on the camp stove when she heard the first scrape. Slow, deliberate, metal against metal. She spun around just in time to see Ruger digging his claws into the far wall, pawing with a strange, urgent rhythm. "Ruger, stop! You'll hurt yourself." He ignored her. He pressed his ear to the cold concrete, listening like something behind it was whispering directly to him. Lena crossed the room, heart pounding. She crouched and placed her palm against the wall. Cold, solid, nothing unusual. But Ruger shifted, nudging her hand slightly until her fingers landed on a small, almost invisible dent in the metal. She knocked on it. The echo was wrong. hollow like knocking on the side of an empty tank. Every instinct told her to step back. Instead, she pressed harder. The vibration ran through the wall again, faint but undeniable. She caught her breath. "Okay," she whispered. "Show me." Ruger backed up, giving her room. His tail stayed stiff, eyes locked on the seam. Not afraid. Determined. Certain. Lena ran her fingers along the edge, searching for something that didn't belong. The bunker had been thrown together in the 60s, built for panic rather than elegance. But this piece of wall was too clean, too straight, too intentional. She reached the old, dead control panel mounted beside it. The switches were rusted, the wires brittle, but one toggle stuck out at a strange angle, newer than the others. She flicked it on instinct. Nothing happened, but Ruger's ears shot up. Lena frowned. She grabbed the screwdriver she'd used to fix the vents and began prying the metal casing off the panel. The screws resisted, then gave way with a screech. Behind them was a mess of wires tangled like vines. Most were dead, but one, running deep behind the wall, hummed softly. She sucked in a breath. "You've got to be kidding me. After 60 years?" She tugged on the wire, following its path with her fingertips. It led straight into the seam Ruger had been pawing at. Her pulse quickened. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see what you found." It took hours to strip the panel bare, test every switch, and guess at the wiring. Each wrong move sent sparks flying or shut the generator down. Lena cursed under her breath so quietly the kids wouldn't hear. Ruger stayed beside her the whole time, a silent soldier refusing to leave his post. Finally, with her fingers numb and her patience bleeding away, she twisted two wires that shouldn't have been connected. A spark leapt, brighter than the rest. And the wall hissed. A long metal hiss, slow and heavy, like a vault remembering how to breathe. Lena stumbled back. Ruger growled low, not in fear, but in warning. The seam split open by less than an inch. A gasp escaped her throat. She grabbed the edge with both hands and pulled. The panel swung outward with a groan, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind the bunker's wall. Dust billowed out, thick enough to taste. Tyler and Emma rushed over, wide-eyed. "Mom, what is that?" Lena held up a hand. "Back, all of you. Stay behind Ruger." Ruger stepped forward immediately, body angled between the kids and the tunnel. His nose twitched, his whole frame vibrated with alertness. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply listened. There was something down there, something breathing or humming or waiting. Lena couldn't tell which. She lifted her flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, revealing concrete walls, narrow and claustrophobic, leading somewhere deeper underground. About 15 feet in, the tunnel ended at a steel door bolted into the rock. A thick wheel lock sat in the center, untouched for decades. "Dear God," Lena whispered. The kids crowded behind her despite her warning. "Mom," Sophia whispered, voice trembling. "Who builds something like that?" Lena couldn't answer. She took a slow breath and stepped toward the tunnel entrance. Ruger blocked her path with his body. Not aggressively, protectively. His eyes met hers, and in that look she understood. This wasn't just a hidden room. This was a place meant to stay hidden. But Ruger had found it anyway. He turned and placed his paw gently on the threshold, as if telling her the next move mattered. Then he stepped inside the tunnel. A single, steady step. Lena felt her lungs tighten. The air felt heavier here, as if the bunker itself was exhaling secrets it had kept buried for 60 years. "Stay behind me," she told the kids, "and no one touches anything." She took Ruger's lead and followed him into the passage. An unexpected chill seeped through the walls. Not from cold air, but from something else. Something intentional. Halfway down the tunnel, Ruger stopped abruptly. his ears angled towards the steel door. He gave a short, sharp bark, and the wheel lock twitched. Just once, like it had been touched from the other side. Lena grabbed her children, heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. "Back!" Her voice cracked. "Now!" They scrambled toward the bunker as Ruger stood his ground, staring at the steel door. It didn't move again. But the message was clear. The door wasn't stuck. It wasn't jammed. It wasn't dead. It was locked by someone who once meant it to be opened again. Lena pulled her children close, trembling. Ruger stood at the mouth of the tunnel, tail stiff, gaze unblinking. He wasn't just a dog following instinct. He was the one who'd heard the truth first. And the truth was calling from behind that door. The steel door loomed in front of her like a sealed promise. Lena stood there for a long time, listening for movement, waiting for the faint twitch she'd seen earlier. Nothing followed. Just silence held tight by 60 years of dust. Ruger nudged her leg once, urging her forward, not recklessly, deliberately, as if to say, "It's time." Lena wrapped both hands around the wheel lock and pulled. Metal groaned, stiff from decades of disuse, until finally it gave with a shudder that echoed through the tunnel. The door cracked open. Cold air rushed out, sharp and dry, untouched by the world above. Inside, her flashlight illuminated a chamber untouched since the Cold War. Rows of wooden crates lined the walls, some stamped with obscure codes, others with faded government seals. A metal desk sat in the corner beneath a map of the United States covered in pins and string. And on the desk lay a stack of journals, bound in cracked leather. Lena's breath hitched. Her great-uncle Howard Lane had lived like a ghost. No family, no visits, no explanations. These might be the only truths he'd left behind. She reached for the top journal. The first page was dated June 1962. Project Sentinel, Civilian Asset Dispersal Initiative. Her pulse kicked hard. She flipped the page. Selected participants entrusted with secure storage of assets in case of national collapse. Oversight transferred to private channels. Assets are to remain undisclosed under penalty of federal prosecution. Every line tightened a knot in her stomach. She read faster. Participants chosen for loyalty and isolation. Expected to hold materials indefinitely. No retrieval protocol, no end date. Lena swallowed. He didn't just prepare for disaster. He was part of it. Ruger paced the room, sniffing each crate with a level of seriousness she'd only seen during thunderstorms. Twice he circled the same stack, then moved on. His tail stayed low, body taut. He understood something monumental was buried here. She moved to the map on the wall. It held dozens of red pins, forming a strange constellation across the country. Each one corresponded to a number scribbled in the journal margins. Crates delivered, locations confirmed, assets secured. She had no idea what kinds of assets he meant, but considering the secrecy, they weren't canned beans. "Uncle Howard," she whispered, "what did they make you protect?" Ruger froze at a crate near the far corner. He pawed it once, then sat. Upright. Alert. He looked at her with the same intensity as when he'd found the hollow wall. "That one?" Lena whispered. He didn't blink. Her hands trembled as she approached the crate. It was larger than the others, banded with thick metal straps. A tag dangled off one side, the ink barely legible. "Sentinel Unit 7, reserved." She lifted the lid. Inside were smaller metal cases, each labeled with numbers she didn't understand. She opened the first one and felt her heartbeat stutter. Rows of stacked gold bars filled the case, the surface gleaming under her flashlight. She opened a second. Bearer bonds. Hundreds of them, each worth thousands. The third case held sealed packets of crisp $100 bills dated from a time long before she was born. Her legs gave out and she sat hard on the concrete. Her breath came in uneven bursts. Ruger pressed against her side, grounding her, steady as the earth. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It can't be real." But it was. She counted the cases quickly, hands shaking with every number. She didn't need a calculator to know what she was staring at. Nearly $300 million. Her ex-husband's voice echoed in her head. "They're your kids. Figure it out." "Oh, I figured it out," she whispered. Except this wasn't salvation. This was a trap. The journals continued across the desk in meticulous handwriting. She grabbed the next one and skimmed until she found an entry written in a different tone, the letters jagged as though written in fear. October 1978. Unmarked cars on the ridge again. They want what they gave us. They say it's for national security, but no one hands civilians millions of dollars for security. There is no protocol for surrender. They want silence. They want the assets hidden forever. I cannot trust them. Lena felt ice crawl through her bloodstream. She flipped again. November 1978. If anyone finds this, they'll come for it again. They won't care who gets hurt. Her breath stilled. Ruger nudged her hand gently, sensing her fear. Lena looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. "We shouldn't be here." But Ruger moved to the far wall again, where dust had collected thickly. He sniffed, then stepped back as if expecting her to look. She swept her light across the wall. A small metal safe was embedded there, almost invisible beneath grime. Howard had drawn a faint chalk mark around it decades ago, a circle, and beneath it, in fading pencil, "If you read this, you are family. Take what you need, but be careful." Lena stared until her vision blurred. Howard hadn't just left her land. He had prepared it for her, prepared all of this for someone who might one day need it more than he ever did. A surge of emotion choked her, too tangled to name. Gratitude, fear, awe, guilt, relief so sharp it hurt. Ruger leaned into her again, warm and solid, the one constant truth in the middle of a revelation too big to hold. Her kids were safe. For the first time in months, maybe for the first time ever, they had a future. But the same journal pages echoed in her mind. They'll come for it again. Lena wiped her face with the back of her hand, forcing her breathing steady. She closed the crates one by one. She shut the steel cases. She closed the safe and brushed dirt over the chalk, erasing the last trace of Howard's mark. Then she turned off her flashlight. "Come on, Ruger," she whispered. "We need to be smart." The dog stayed close as she sealed the steel door and pushed the hidden panel back into place. The bunker swallowed the sound, burying the secret again. But now Lena understood the weight of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't treasure. It was evidence. Evidence worth killing for. Ruger stopped beside her, watching her with quiet intensity. He had sensed the danger before she did, and he knew this wasn't the end of the secret. It was only the beginning. Lena barely slept after discovering the crates. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Howard's handwriting, shaky and desperate. They'll come for it again. His warnings clung to her like cold air, settling into the corners of her mind. By morning, she needed answers. Real ones, not guesses or half-formed fears. She drove to the Colby Ridge Public Library with the kids bundled in jackets, Ruger warming their legs in the back seat. The sky hung low and heavy, hinting at snow. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside, she found an empty table in the back corner and opened her laptop. She typed Howard Lane, Montana obituary. Nothing. She typed Project Sentinel. Only conspiracy threads and Cold War speculation. She dug deeper, scrolling through declassified archives, then old newspaper clippings. 3 hours in, she found it. A tiny article from 1979. Local man claims government surveillance. Resident believes federal agents monitoring property. The man pictured was younger, but unmistakably Howard. Pale eyes, a guarded slouch. The article dismissed him as paranoid, but the journals told another story. She typed faster. Howard Lane background, Howard Lane lawsuit, Howard Lane Cold War. Then she froze. A memo, partially censored, released under FOIA in the early 2000s. Subject: Lane, Howard status, civilian asset holder. Recommendation: continued monitoring. Below it, a single line uncensored. Do not retrieve assets unless national destabilization occurs. Maintain containment. Containment. Lena's stomach lurched. You okay, Mom? Tyler asked quietly. She forced a smile. Just researching. But Ruger wasn't convinced. He had been lying under the table, calm as stone, when he suddenly lifted his head. A low rumble rolled from his chest. Lena stiffened. Ruger, she whispered. He didn't look at her. He stared past her shoulder, at someone approaching. A man in his 50s stood by the table. Grey suit, tired eyes. A badge clipped to his belt, half hidden but visible enough to be intentional. Miss Carter, he said softly. Her body went cold. Who are you? The man placed a hand on the chair opposite her. Not sitting, claiming space. My name is Paul Hennessy, he said. National Archives. I'm hoping we can discuss your property outside Colby Ridge. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she almost missed the second set of footsteps behind him. A younger man, athletic, military posture, expression like carved steel. Department of Defense ID hanging openly around his neck. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. The air shifted, heavy, measured. Ruger stood instantly. No bark, no leap. But every muscle locked, ears pinned forward, protective, calculating. Paul held up a hand in a gesture meant to look harmless. We're not here to cause trouble. Just routine follow-up concerning Cold War installations that fall under our archival jurisdiction. Lena shut her laptop. What does that mean? It means, Paul said, lowering his voice. Your great-uncle participated in a classified civil defense program. We track remnants of those sites when ownership changes hands. The younger agent stepped closer, eyes fixed on her in a stare that felt like interrogation. And your site has inconsistencies? The words hit like a blow. What inconsistencies? Lena asked. Paul leaned on the table now. We'd like to do an inventory of materials stored on the property. Old documents, equipment, nothing personally valuable. Lena tightened her grip on the laptop. I haven't removed anything. Paul's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's good, because classified materials remain the property of the United States government. Her pulse stuttered. Paul slid a card towards her. We'll come by in 2 days, Thursday morning. Try to make sure access points are clear. Lena didn't touch the card. Maybe I'm not comfortable with visitors to my property. Agent Cold Eyes finally spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. This isn't optional. Ruger let out a sharp bark at the tone. The entire library turned. The agent took half a step back. Not from fear, from calculation. Paul nodded politely. 2 days, Miss Carter. It'll be painless if we work together. The men walked away, their departure somehow louder than their arrival. Lena didn't breathe until they left the building. Even then, the air felt thin. Tyler's voice was small. Mom, are we in trouble? Lena forced herself to look calm. No, we're fine. Ruger didn't believe her. His gaze stayed locked on the glass doors long after the men were gone. She gathered the kids and hurried to the van. As soon as the doors shut, her facade cracked. Her hands shook violently on the steering wheel. Ruger pressed against her shoulder, lending strength she no longer had. She whispered, They know. The drive back felt shorter than it should have. Fear made miles collapse. At the bunker, Lena slammed the hatch shut behind them and secured every lock she could reach. She leaned against the cold metal, chest tight. Howard wasn't paranoid. He was hunted. And now they were too. That night, after the kids fell into uneasy sleep, Lena spread Howard's journals across the floor. She flipped to the final entries. April 1991. Same men outside again. Government wants silence, wants everything returned. I won't give it to them. Not when I know what they did. Not when I know why they hid these assets. If I disappear, it will not be by choice. Another entry. December 1993. I see them watching the ridge at night. I keep the low lights on. They think I'm scared. They think that keeps me quiet. They don't understand. I'm waiting for someone else, someone who might need this more than I ever did. Lena's throat tightened. Ruger looked up at her and placed his nose against the last page, like he could sense the weight of the words. She closed the journal, her decision forming like ice settling in water. They had 2 days before those men returned. 2 days before the government opened the bunker. 2 days before the truth became a threat. And judging by Ruger's unblinking stare at the hidden panel, danger wasn't coming. It was already here. The knock came at exactly 8 in the morning, sharp and rehearsed, as if someone had practiced the rhythm on the ride over. Lena already knew who it was. She stood in the bunker's narrow hallway, body stiff, Ruger at her side like a shadow carved out of muscle and instinct. She opened the outer hatch only halfway. Paul Hennessy stood there with a strained smile, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Behind him, the young DOD agent from the library watched her with the cold patience of a man who expected obedience. "Good morning, Miss Carter," Paul said. "We're here for the inspection." "You don't have a warrant," Lena answered. Paul sighed. "We don't need one. These materials are mine." She cut in. "Because they're on my land. And unless you can show me a legal document saying otherwise, you don't come in." The younger agent's jaw tightened. "This is a national matter. Then get a national warrant." Ruger growled, low and steady, the sound vibrating against Lena's calf. Paul lifted his hands, trying to look harmless, but the younger man took a step forward. "No," Lena said sharply. "Stay right where you are." For a moment, no one moved. Then Paul inhaled, clearly frustrated. "We'll be back," he said, "sooner than you think." They turned and walked back to their vehicle, a plain SUV with government plates. The engine started, dust rising behind it as it rolled down the road. Lena didn't breathe until it disappeared around the bend. Ruger remained at the hatch, staring at the trail long after the SUV vanished. He didn't relax. If anything, he bristled harder. Lena whispered, "I know, they'll be back." She just didn't realize how soon. That night, the wind moaned across the ridge like an old warning. Lena tried reading Howard's journals again, but the words swam, refusing to settle. The kids slept in sleeping bags near the heater. Ruger dozed beside them, steady and warm, but his ears twitched every few seconds. At 2:14 a.m., he shot up. No hesitation, no confusion, alert. He moved to the hatch and pressed his nose to the seam. His whole frame hardened. "Ruger?" Lena whispered. He looked back at her once, eyes sharp as knives. Not a false alarm. She killed the lantern and grabbed a flashlight. Her heart pounded so violently she felt it in her teeth. She crawled to the bunk room where the kids slept and gently shook Tyler awake. "Shoes on," she whispered. "Quiet." He nodded without a single question. Fear had taught them all to move fast. She roused Emma and Sophia, her voice barely audible, her breaths shallow. Ruger circled behind them, pushing the kids gently toward the emergency exit tunnel Howard had carved decades earlier. The sound outside grew clearer. Footsteps, slow, measured, and more than two. Someone whispered, "Move on my count." Lena froze. Military whispers didn't sound like that. These weren't government men following procedure. These were mercenaries. Contracted. Unofficial. She mouthed, "Go." The kids crawled down the tunnel, Ruger behind them like a silent guardian. Lena stayed back long enough to yank open crates, scatter old canned rations, drag a mattress into the hallway, kick over a table, and pull wiring out of the wall. She wiped surfaces as she moved, erasing fingerprints, smearing dust to obscure footprints. If they found the bunker stripped and chaotic, it would look abandoned for years, not recently inhabited. She pulled the metal panel over the hidden door, brushing dust across it until it looked untouched. Outside, gravel crunched under boots. "Breach it," a man whispered. She sprinted down the escape tunnel after her kids. Ruger waited at the far end, pupils wide, body trembling with the need to protect. Lena sealed the hatch behind them just as a deafening blast tore through the main entrance. The bunker shook. Sophia screamed. Ruger pressed against her, absorbing her fear like he always did. Lena grabbed her children and ran through the forest trail. Branches clawed at her jacket, frost snapping under her boots. Behind them, distant voices shouted, "They ran! Spread out!" Ruger kept pace at her side, guiding her around roots, down slopes, through dark brush. Not once did he falter. Not once did he look afraid. A mile later, Lena spotted the faint glow of a cabin window. Not government. A neighbor. A rancher named Bill who sometimes offered water when he saw them in town. She pounded on the door. Bill swung it open in shock. "Lena! What in God's name? Please!" she gasped. "Just let the kids stay here, please! Only for tonight!" Bill took one look at her face and ushered them in. Ruger refused to enter. He stood on the porch, watching the tree line with a soldier's focus. Lena knelt beside him. "I have to go back," she whispered. "They'll destroy everything." Ruger leaned against her, then pulled away and trotted towards the trail, pausing just long enough to look over his shoulder. "Follow me." She did. At dawn, Lena approached the ridge carefully. Smoke curled from the blown hatch. Government SUVs lined the road now, not unmarked mercenary trucks. Men in tactical jackets searched the area while Paul spoke to two uniformed officers. Ruger crawled beside her on the ridge, hidden behind brush. Paul's voice carried in the cold morning air. "We have the mother detained. No sign of the children." Lena's stomach dropped. Two officers dragged her out of the trees before she could react. Hands pinned, shoulders wrenched, she shouted, "I haven't done anything wrong." Paul stepped in, mask of sympathy stretched thin across his face. "Ms. Carter, you refused inspection, you evaded federal agents, and you abandoned the property after a forced entry." "That wasn't me. Someone else. We'll sort that out downtown." A phone rose from the crowd. A bystander from the neighboring farm. He was filming everything. Paul's jaw clenched. The young DOD agent tried to block the camera, but it was too late. The footage already captured the struggle, the cuffs, the fear in her voice. Ruger erupted from the tree line. He didn't attack. He planted himself between the officers and Lena, teeth bared, barking so loudly it echoed across the ridge. One officer reached for his sidearm. "No!" Lena screamed. Bill sprinted down the hill. "That dog is protecting his family." The officer hesitated. Enough for another bystander to lift a phone, and another, and another. Within minutes, half the ridge had phones pointed at the government convoy. The younger DOD agent hissed at Paul, "This is turning into a mess." Paul lowered his voice. "Get her in the SUV, now." They shoved Lena inside. The door slammed. Outside, Ruger clawed at the pavement until his paws bled, refusing to leave her. and as the vehicle pulled away, dozens of cameras caught the moment a German shepherd chased the SUV, desperate, loyal, unstoppable. The footage hit social media before Lena reached the station, and by the time she stepped into interrogation, thousands of people across the country had already watched the clip. A homeless mother being arrested, a loyal dog refusing to abandon her, and a government team that suddenly had far more eyes on them than they ever wanted. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was spreading. The holding cell smelled like cold concrete and disinfectant. Lena sat on the bench with her hands clasped tight, fighting the tremor running through her entire body. She wasn't afraid of jail. She was afraid of what would happen to her kids. And Ruger. God, Ruger! The image of him chasing the SUV replayed in her mind until her chest ached. A guard appeared. "Carter, you have counsel." "I don't have money for counsel," she muttered. He shrugged. "Tell that to the guy waiting." The heavy door buzzed open. Lena stepped into the interview room expecting a public defender with tired eyes and too many files. Instead, a tall man in his 40s stood by the window, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, energy sharp and focused. "Ms. Carter," he said, approaching with a firm handshake. "I'm Daniel Rhodes, former federal prosecutor, now working independently." Lena blinked. "I didn't call anyone." "You didn't have to." His smile carried something like resolve. "Half the country saw your arrest online." He opened his laptop, turning the screen towards her. Headlines flashed back at her as if the world had exploded overnight. Homeless mother arrested without warrant after inheriting Cold War bunker. German shepherd tries to stop federal convoy. Did the government target the wrong family? The clip of Ruger, a single moment of pure, desperate loyalty, had gone viral. The internet had already named him Patriot Dog. Daniel tapped the screen. "Public opinion is on your side, and the ACLU reached out the moment they saw the footage. You have national support now." Lena swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. "My kids. They're safe. A rancher named Bill is with them, and animal control tried to take your dog, but he refused to leave your property. Locals stepped in and said he's protected. They bandaged his paws. He's okay." Lena covered her mouth, relief nearly dropping her to her knees. Daniel sat across from her. "Before we do anything, I need you to tell me exactly what was in that bunker." She hesitated. For the first time since stepping into the hidden room, she wondered if telling even a lawyer the truth would destroy everything. Daniel leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to stop them." "Why would you help me?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Because I spent 15 years watching government programs go unchallenged. I quit when I learned how far they'd go to bury mistakes. And Sentinel," he exhaled, "is one of the biggest." Her pulse stilled. "You know Sentinel?" "I've only seen fragments. It was buried aggressively. But based on your arrest and the agents involved? Yes, this matches." She nodded slowly. Then she told him everything. The sealed room, the crates, the journals, the warnings, the 300 million in assets that weren't supposed to exist. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't even blink. When she finished, he said, "They violated at least 7 federal procedures trying to retrieve those materials. You refused access, which is your right. They used force, which wasn't theirs." "Are they going to take the kids from me?" Lena whispered. "No," he said firmly. "Not with what we're about to do." He opened a folder. Inside were photocopies of 2 documents stamped with a government eagle. "These arrived anonymously an hour ago," he said. "Someone inside National Archives sent them to me." "Who?" Daniel hesitated. "I can't prove it, but I'd bet my license it was Paul Driscoll." Lena stared. "Paul. He was one of the men who tried to get in." Exactly. Which means something changed. Daniel tapped the classified pages. These documents confirm that Project Sentinel was never legally authorized. It was a shadow program designed to hide assets off the books. Your uncle didn't hoard anything. He was coerced into storing government property that no longer had an owner. Lena whispered, "So, it wasn't his fault?" "No," Daniel said. "He was a victim, and so are you." She lowered her gaze. "How does that help us?" Daniel leaned back. "We're going to negotiate, before they realize their own agent leaked documents." The conference room at the station filled fast. Lena sat beside Daniel, wrists free for the first time since dawn. Across the table sat 3 federal attorneys, the young DOD agent, and Paul Driscoll. Paul wouldn't meet her eyes. The chief attorney started, "Ms. Carter, in the interest of simplifying this matter—" Daniel raised a hand. "Before you continue, I'd like to enter these documents into the record." He slid the Sentinel files across the table. Every attorney went rigid. The young DOD agent's face drained of color. Paul finally looked up, pain flickering in his eyes. "This wasn't authorized." One attorney muttered. "No," Daniel said, "which makes your attempted retrieval illegal." Another attorney snapped, "You don't know what you're holding." Daniel met her stare coolly. $300 million in undocumented assets, a secret Cold War program with 0 legal standing, and an arrest that violated every step of due process. Silence thickened. Lena could almost hear her heart beating. Ruger wasn't there, but she imagined him sitting beside her, steady and unshakable. Finally, the lead attorney cleared his throat. "What exactly are you proposing?" Daniel didn't smile. "Simple. Ms. Carter agrees to surrender the majority of the assets to a federal trust for public audit. In return, she keeps a legally protected portion as inheritance. You drop all charges, and no further action is taken against her or her children." The attorney scoffed. "She wants a cut of government property?" Daniel leaned forward. "She wants stability for her children, and you want the program buried. We both know anything less will end up on the front page of every paper tomorrow." The attorney shifted, looking at Paul. "This isn't standard protocol." Paul finally spoke, voice quiet but steady. "Because Sentinel was never supposed to exist, and she didn't do anything wrong." The room froze. The DOD agent glared at him. "You're making a mistake." Paul swallowed. "The mistake would be pretending this woman deserves to be treated like a criminal." Daniel murmured, "Sounds like good faith to me." After a long, tense silence, the lead attorney exhaled. "Fine. She keeps 30%. The rest returns to federal oversight." 30%. Nearly $100 million. Lena nearly choked. "I don't need that," she whispered. "I just want my kids safe." Daniel placed a hand over hers. "Then take what gives them a future." She nodded slowly. The attorney scribbled the agreement. "Once you sign, you're free to go." Free. She hadn't allowed herself to believe that word in years. Outside the station, air cold enough to sting filled her lungs. A crowd had gathered, reporters, bystanders, people holding signs that said things like, "Justice for Lena and let Patriot Dog go home." And then she saw him. Ruger, standing with Bill, wrapped in a makeshift bandage around one paw. The moment he spotted her, he broke free and sprinted, launching himself into her arms with a sound somewhere between a bark and a cry. She buried her face in his fur. "You saved us," she whispered. "All of us." Ruger stood tall, pressing his head against her chest as the crowd applauded. Daniel joined her a moment later. "You ready to go home?" Her eyes drifted to the ridge, the bunker hidden beneath it, the place that had nearly destroyed them but would now rebuild their lives. She nodded. "Yeah, I think we finally are." and for the first time in years she let herself believe in the possibility of healing, not because she inherited a bunker, but because a German shepherd refused to let her face the truth alone. For the first time in months, Lena walked out of a courthouse without feeling like the ground might collapse beneath her. The Montana sky stretched wide and blue above her, open in a way she hadn't felt inside herself in years. The ink on the agreement was barely dry, but the weight that lifted from her chest was undeniable. $22 million. Legally hers. The land. The bunker. The future. She didn't cry until she saw Ruger waiting beside the kids, tail sweeping slow arcs across the gravel, like he'd been guarding the whole world while she was gone. The moment he saw her, he jogged forward, nose pressed into her stomach, whining in relief. "I know," she whispered, kneeling to hold his face. "We're finally okay." Ruger sat tall, nudging her hand once as if to say, "You're not done. But you're safe." The first thing she did with the money wasn't buying a house or a new van. It wasn't upgrading clothes or taking the kids on some dream vacation. It was driving straight to the small hardware store on the edge of town and ordering lumber, insulation, roofing panels, electrical supplies, and security cameras. The bunker didn't need to be hidden anymore. It needed to be safe. She met contractors in the driveway, explaining what she wanted with a firmness that surprised even her. Reinforced doors, rewired circuits, clean airflow, fireproofing. A generator that didn't threaten to explode if someone sneezed near it. One of the carpenters asked, "You building a panic shelter?" "No," Lena said. "I'm building a home." Ruger circled the workers, inspecting equipment with the seriousness of a foreman twice his size. Every now and then he'd stop and give a gentle nudge to a worker carrying something heavy, like he sensed the strain before they did. The men started calling him Sergeant Ruger by the second week. By month 2, life had shifted into a gentle rhythm she didn't trust at first. The kids had new backpacks, clean jackets, and actual beds. Real ones, not inflatable mats in the back of a minivan. Bill and his wife drove them to school some mornings, insisting it was no trouble at all. The town had A-list now, a small group of people who'd decided she wasn't a headline. She was a neighbor. Emma joined the junior choir. Sophia discovered library books like they were treasure chests. Tyler walked taller, shoulders no longer curled inward like he expected the world to knock him down. And Ruger, always alert, always listening, always somewhere between guardian and legend, became the quiet heart of everything. At school drop-off, the principal knelt to scratch behind his ears. At the grocery store, people slipped him treats without asking. At the fire station, one of the captains painted his name on a small wooden plaque, "Local Hero." He didn't seem to care about any of it. His pride came from simpler things, staying close to the kids, patrolling the property, sleeping at the foot of Lena's bed. But everyone saw him. Everyone knew. The dog who saved a family. The dog who stood against armed men. The dog who refused to let injustice happen quietly. One early morning, Lena stood at the edge of the property while frost clung to the grass, and the bunker sat beneath the hill like a living thing rediscovered. She could smell wood from the new siding and hear the hum of generators freshly installed. For the first time, the place didn't feel like Howard's burden. It felt like hers, her family's legacy, a place built on fear, remade into safety. She heard pacing behind her. Ruger came to stand beside her, tail brushing her hip. "What do you think?" she asked. He sat, staring toward the distant ridge. There was no tension in his body anymore, no fear, just watchfulness, trust, peace earned through fire. It struck her how deeply his presence shaped the air around them. Ruger wasn't just a dog living in the aftermath of chaos. He was the reason they survived it. "I owe you everything," Lena whispered. Ruger nudged her knee once, then placed a paw over her boot as if grounding her in place. You owe me nothing. We did this together. The news cycle eventually moved on to other stories, but every few weeks a journalist still emailed requesting an interview. Lena turned them all down. Her story had been used enough. Her children deserved silence after the storm. Instead, she found new purpose in returning donations sent by strangers who had watched her viral arrest. Some checks were large, most small, many anonymous. She mailed everyone back with a handwritten note. Thank you for your kindness. We're doing better now. Please use this to help someone else. People wrote back, some confused, some grateful, many simply touched by the gesture. The town began calling her the woman who refused charity, which wasn't true, but she didn't correct anyone. She didn't refuse kindness. She refused pity. And she finally had the tools to stand on her own. One afternoon, after school, Tyler walked up the hill with Ruger trotting beside him. The boy dropped his backpack on the grass and said, "Mom, they want Ruger to be the school's honorary safety dog." Lena smiled. What does that even mean? It means he walks the perimeter with the principal and gets extra treats. Ruger barked once, as if approving the contract. Sophia added, "The librarian said he's allowed inside now, even in the reading circle." Emma chimed in. And the mayor said, "He wants to give Ruger a medal." Lena knelt beside the dog and kissed the top of his head. "You hear that? You're important." Ruger pressed his head into her chest, a soft rumble vibrating through him. He knew. He always knew. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the world took on a warm gold that softened every hard memory. The wind rustled gently, not as a warning this time, but as a reminder. Storms pass, lives rebuild, and sometimes the quiet after the chaos is louder than the battle itself. Lena wrapped her arms around her children. Ruger stood beside them like a statue carved from loyalty and bone. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. Winter loosened its grip early that year, as if Montana itself was giving Lena permission to start over. Snow melted into the soil above the bunker, leaving behind soft earth and clear skies. In that slow thaw, life shifted again. Not through crisis this time, but through purpose. It began with one family. A woman named Teresa showed up on Lena's driveway with 2 children and a car packed with everything they owned. She'd heard about Lena on the news months earlier and had finally worked up the courage to ask for help. She didn't want money. She needed a place to land, a place that wouldn't treat her like a burden. Lena didn't hesitate. She gave them food, a warm bed, a shower that finally ran hot. And as Teresa cried into her hands, Lena realized something quietly life-changing. Survival wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of someone else's. Within days, she met with a financial advisor and a local non-profit coordinator. They sat at the large wooden table in the renovated cabin while Ruger curled at her feet, listening, alert in that uncanny way he always had. "I want to start a fund," Lena said, "for families like mine. Emergency housing, cash assistance, job support?" The coordinator asked. "All of it," Lena answered. "No hoops, no humiliation, just a lifeline." The advisor raised an eyebrow. "You want something quiet or public?" "Quiet," Lena said immediately, "but effective." That became the mission statement. The Carter Resilience Fund launched 2 weeks later. Lena didn't put her name on the website or the brochures. She didn't want fame. She wanted impact. She wanted to take the pain she'd carried and turn it into shelter for others. Real shelter, not a minivan parked behind a Walmart lot. The first 10 families were helped by spring. By summer, it doubled. By fall, triple. Word spread not because of her name, but because the help was real. Ruger became the soul of the new movement without even trying. Families arrived shaken, afraid, distrustful. Children especially. But every time, without fail, Ruger approached them slowly, head low, tail soft, like he was telling them, "You're safe here. I know what fear smells like. You don't have to carry it alone." One boy wouldn't speak for 3 days until Ruger dropped a tennis ball at his feet. A young mother jumped at every sudden noise until Ruger lay across her doorway at night. A toddler who had never seen a big dog before climbed onto Ruger's back like he was a horse made of patience. The town noticed. People started calling him the Heart of Sentinel Ridge. The mayor even suggested a bronze statue someday. Lena laughed at that, but a part of her knew they meant it. Ruger wasn't just her dog anymore. He had become a symbol of loyalty, of protection, of the truth a dog can sense long before humans catch up. By midsummer, the bunker had transformed into something unrecognizable, yet deeply familiar. Locals came by appointment to learn practical skills: water filtration, emergency kits, first aid basics, power outage prep. The prepper stereotype didn't exist here. These were families who'd lived through wildfire seasons, flash floods, sudden layoffs, medical crises. Survival wasn't paranoia. Survival was wisdom. And Lena found herself teaching something she never expected to understand so well. Resilience is a muscle. You build it slowly until one day it carries you farther than fear ever could. One Saturday morning, while reorganizing old shelves, Emma tugged at Lena's sleeve. "Mom, Ruger found something." The dog was sitting in front of the steel door of the former hidden room. His tail thumped once, soft, deliberate. He wasn't warning. He was waiting. "What is it, boy?" Lena whispered. Ruger nosed the bottom corner. Dust shifted. Something small and rectangular peeked out, wedged between the wall and the floorboard. Lena knelt and pulled gently. A paper envelope, yellowed and fragile, slid free. Her breath caught. Handwriting in faded ink read, "For the next one. For the one who needs this more than I ever did." Lena sat on the floor with trembling hands as the kids gathered around her. Ruger lay down, resting one paw across her foot like he always did when he sensed she needed grounding. Inside the envelope was a letter. Just one page. Typed on an old typewriter. The edges smelled like dust and time. "To whoever inherits this place and the burden inside it, I am sorry, and I am grateful. Sorry because this bunker was built out of fear. Grateful because you found it, which means you needed it. If you are reading this, then the program they forced me into has outlived its usefulness. I prayed it would never be needed, prayed the world would never fall far enough that someone had to rely on what's hidden here. But life is unpredictable. Fear is unpredictable. And sometimes the thing we built to survive the end becomes the thing someone else needs to start again. If the government comes for you, do not face them alone. If they offer you a deal, make sure it buys your future, not their silence. And if you ever feel guilty for using what I preserved, remember this: survival is not selfish. It is a promise to the people you love, a promise to keep going, a promise to build something better. Do not waste what I left. Do not hide from it. Build something that matters. You were meant to find this." Clarence Ford. By the time Lena reached the last line, her vision was blurred. She wiped at her cheeks, surprised by the intensity of her own tears. She wasn't crying because the words were heavy. She was crying because they felt true. "He knew," Sophia whispered. "He knew you were coming." "No," Lena said softly. "He just knew someone would need what he couldn't use." Ruger pressed his nose into her shoulder, breathing steady. She stroked his head, leaning into the warmth of him. "You found this," she murmured. "Just like you found everything else." He looked at her with those deep amber eyes that seemed to reflect things she couldn't explain, things he sensed long before she ever did. "You're part of this legacy too, you know," she whispered. Ruger nudged the letter gently, as if in agreement. By fall, Sentinel Ridge was no longer just a place on a map. It was a community, a sanctuary, a reminder that survival stories could have soft endings too. Kids visited on field trips. Church groups asked her to speak. College students interviewed her about Cold War history. Hikers left treats in a small wooden box labeled for Ruger. And every evening, as the wind rolled across the hills and dusk settled over the land, Lena walked beside Ruger toward the bunker that had once been a refuge and was now something much bigger. A home, a classroom, a lifeline for others like her. Sometimes she imagined Clarence standing beside her in the fading light, nodding in approval at what she'd done with the burden he left behind. Sometimes she imagined what her life would have become without that dog, without the instincts that led them to the wall, the hidden panel, the narrow escape in the dark. Ruger trotted ahead, glancing back at her with a spark of mischief, as if saying, "Come on, we're not done yet." And she believed him. Because the legacy wasn't the gold, or the bunker, or the settlement. The legacy was survival. The legacy was resilience. The legacy was a loyal German shepherd who refused to let his family fall. And Lena knew, deep in her bones, that everything built from here would carry his paw prints. The interview was supposed to be simple. 10 minutes on a small-town morning show, a feel-good segment about resilience and community. But as the lights warmed the studio and the cameras rolled, Lena felt something deeper stirring beneath the surface. This wasn't just a recap of events. It was a closing chapter. A moment she hadn't realized she needed until now. The host, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile and the kind of voice made for radio, leaned forward. "Lena, everyone knows the headlines, the viral arrest, the legal battle, the settlement. But the question people still ask is this: how did you even know something was hidden in that bunker?" Lena exhaled softly. Cameras blinked red. The studio hummed. Ruger sat beside her chair, posture perfect, tail curled neatly around his paws. He looked like a soldier at rest, but his eyes told a different story. Alert, focused, waiting. Lena placed her hand gently on his head. "I didn't," she said. The host blinked, surprised by the simplicity. Lena continued, her voice steady. "He did." Ruger looked up at her then, as if understanding she was finally telling the world the part of the story that belonged to him. "He sensed a truth no human could," Lena said, "and he refused to ignore it. Every time I was scared, every time I doubted myself, Ruger pushed forward. He wasn't trained for any of this. He just knew. He protected us long before I understood what we were running from." The studio fell quiet. Even the camera crew paused. Ruger lifted his chin, and the camera zoomed in. Close enough to catch the gleam of amber in his eyes. Calm, steady, loyal. Eyes that had once stared down armed men without flinching. Eyes that seemed to say, "I'm still watching, still guarding. The story isn't over." The host swallowed. "That's incredible." "It's the truth," Lena said softly. "Everything that happened, every twist, every danger, every moment of hope, it started because he listened to something I couldn't hear." She paused, looking at him with a tenderness that still caught her off guard years later. "Ruger saved us. Not the money, not the bunker, him." After the taping, Lena stepped outside into the crisp Montana afternoon. The station sat at the edge of town, overlooking fields that rolled into distant pine forests. The air smelled like wood smoke and new beginnings. Her kids ran toward her from the car where Bill had been waiting with them. Tyler hugged her waist. Emma wrapped herself around her leg. Sophia stood back, studying her mother like she was memorizing the moment. "Mom, you did great," Sophia said. "You didn't cry this time." I almost did. "Yeah, we saw." Ruger trotted ahead, jumping into the back of the SUV with the ease of a dog who'd always known his place was beside them. Always ready, always present. As the engine started and the road unfolded beneath them, Lena looked out the window at Sentinel Ridge. The land she once arrived at with fear and desperation now felt like an extension of her heartbeat. They'd made something out of nothing, built something out of ruin, not just a home or a foundation or a legacy, but a life, a full one, a life shaped by a dog who had refused to stop searching until he found the truth, and found them again and again along the way. The interview aired a week later. The clip went viral within hours, not because of the bunker or the money or the settlement, because of Ruger. Comments poured in. "That dog knew from day one." German Shepherds don't just protect, they understand. Give Ruger a medal already. I cried when she said, "He did. Dogs like him change lives." Lena read a few before bed, then shut the laptop. She wasn't chasing attention anymore. She didn't need validation. But she did feel something warm settle in her chest, knowing the world finally saw Ruger the way she did. A partner, a guardian, a survivor. 2 weeks later, the local community center hosted a preparedness workshop. They invited Lena to speak. She hesitated at first, but Ruger nudged her hand until she agreed. The stage wasn't her comfort zone, but maybe comfort wasn't the point. She stepped up to the podium. Ruger stood by her side. "I used to think survival was something you did alone," she began. "But I learned that survival is something you build with the people and animals you trust most." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I inherited a bunker. I found money. I fought a government program I didn't understand. But none of that is the real story. The real story is that a dog with nothing but instinct and loyalty kept my family alive long enough to rebuild. He knew danger before I did. He knew hope before I did. And he never once stopped believing we'd make it." She looked down at Ruger, who gazed up as if reminding her he was still right there. "We survived because he refused to let us fail." Silence fell over the room. Then applause. Loud, long, genuine. And in that applause, Lena felt it, the closing of a circle. The story wasn't about fear or money or secrecy anymore. It was about legacy. Hers, Clarence's, and Ruger's most of all. That night, they sat on the porch watching the sun melt into the horizon. The kids laughed inside, their voices drifting through the open windows. Ruger lay across Lena's feet, warm and steady. She thought about the question the host asked her on the show. She thought about every twist that brought her here, and she thought about the thousands of people who would watch that clip and feel something familiar in her words. Maybe fear, maybe hope, maybe love, maybe the memory of a pet they once trusted with their whole heart. She reached down, scratching Ruger gently behind the ear. "You ready?" she whispered. He wagged his tail once. "Yes." Lena looked straight into the imaginary lens of the future, into the hearts of everyone who would someday hear her story, and spoke the final words she wished she'd said long ago. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The screen faded there, but the meaning didn't. Some stories don't end. Some stories keep guarding you long after the credits roll. And some stories begin with a German Shepherd who refuses to look away from the truth. If Ruger's story touched you, share your own. Subscribe. Support our channel. Honor the companions who stand by us when the world falls apart. Because sometimes loyalty doesn't just save a life. Sometimes it rebuilds one. Chuang 10. The interview was supposed to be simple. 10 minutes on a small-town morning show, a feel-good segment about resilience and community. But as the lights warmed the studio and the cameras rolled, Lena felt something deeper, stirring beneath the surface. This wasn't just a recap of events, it was a closing chapter, a moment she hadn't realized she needed until now. The host, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile and the kind of voice made for radio, leaned forward. Lena, everyone knows the headlines, the viral arrest, the legal battle, the settlement. But the question people still ask is this: how did you even know something was hidden in that bunker? Lena exhaled softly. Cameras blinked red. The studio hummed. Ruger sat beside her chair, posture perfect, tail curled neatly around his paws. He looked like a soldier at rest, but his eyes told a different story. Alert, focused, waiting. Lena placed her hand gently on his head. "I didn't," she said. The host blinked, surprised by the simplicity. Lena continued, her voice steady. "He did." Ruger looked up at her then, as if understanding she was finally telling the world the part of the story that belonged to him. "He sensed a truth no human could," Lena said, "and he refused to ignore it. Every time I was scared, every time I doubted myself, Ruger pushed forward. He wasn't trained for any of this. He just knew. He protected us long before I understood what we were running from." The studio fell quiet. Even the camera crew paused. Ruger lifted his chin, and the camera zoomed in, close enough to catch the gleam of amber in his eyes. Calm, steady, loyal. Eyes that had once stared down armed men without flinching. Eyes that seemed to say, "I'm still watching, still guarding." "The story isn't over." The host swallowed. "That's incredible. It's the truth," Lena said softly. "Everything that happened, every twist, every danger, every moment of hope, it started because he listened to something I couldn't hear." She paused, looking at him with a tenderness that still caught her off guard years later. "Ruger saved us. Not the money. Not the bunker. Him." After the taping, Lena stepped outside into the crisp Montana afternoon. The station sat at the edge of town, overlooking fields that rolled into distant pine forests. The air smelled like wood smoke and new beginnings. Her kids ran toward her from the car where Bill had been waiting with them. Tyler hugged her waist. Emma wrapped herself around her leg. Sophia stood back, studying her mother like she was memorizing the moment. "Mom, you did great," Sophia said. "You didn't cry this time." "I almost did." "Yeah, we saw." Ruger trotted ahead, jumping into the back of the SUV with the ease of a dog who'd always known his place was beside them. Always ready. Always present. As the engine started and the road unfolded beneath them, Lena looked out the window at Sentinel Ridge. The land she once arrived, and with fear and desperation now felt like an extension of her heartbeat. They'd made something out of nothing, built something out of ruin. Not just a home or a foundation or a legacy, but a life, a full one. A life shaped by a dog who had refused to stop searching until he found the truth, and found them again and again along the way. The interview aired a week later. The clip went viral within hours, not because of the bunker or the money or the settlement, because of Ruger. Comments poured in. That dog knew from day one. German shepherds don't just protect, they understand. Give Ruger a medal already. I cried when she said he did. Dogs like him change lives. Lena read a few before bed, then shut the laptop. She wasn't chasing attention anymore. She didn't need validation. But she did feel something warm settle in her chest, knowing the world finally saw Ruger the way she did. A partner, a guardian, a survivor. 2 weeks later, the local community center hosted a preparedness workshop. They invited Lena to speak. She hesitated at first, but Ruger nudged her hand until she agreed. The stage wasn't her comfort zone, but maybe comfort wasn't the point. She stepped up to the podium. Ruger stood by her side. "I used to think survival was something you did alone," she began. "But I learned that survival is something you build with the people and animals you trust most." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I inherited a bunker. I found money. I fought a government program I didn't understand. But none of that is the real story. The real story is that a dog with nothing but instinct and loyalty kept my family alive long enough to rebuild. He knew danger before I did. He knew hope before I did. And he never once stopped believing we'd make it." She looked down at Ruger, who gazed up as if reminding her he was still right there. "We survived because he refused to let us fail." Silence fell over the room. Then applause, loud, long, genuine. And in that applause, Lena felt it, the closing of a circle. The story wasn't about fear or money or secrecy anymore. It was about legacy. Hers, Clarence's, and Ruger's most of all. That night, they sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The kids laughed inside, their voices drifting through the open windows. Ruger lay across Lena's feet, warm and steady. She thought about the question the host asked her on the show. She thought about every twist that brought her here. And she thought about the thousands of people who would watch that clip and feel something familiar in her words. Maybe fear, maybe hope, maybe love, maybe the memory of a pet they once trusted with their whole heart. She reached down, scratching Ruger gently behind the ear. "You ready?" she whispered. He wagged his tail once. "Yes." Lena looked straight into the imaginary lens of the future, into the hearts of everyone who would someday hear her story, and spoke the final words she wished she'd said long ago. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The screen faded there, but the meaning didn't. Some stories don't end. Some stories keep guarding you long after the credits roll. And some stories begin with a German shepherd who refuses to look away from the truth. If Ruger's story touched you, share your own. Subscribe. Support our channel. Honor the companions who stand by us when the world falls apart. Because sometimes loyalty doesn't just save a life. Sometimes it rebuilds one.